Why? Why a church? I mean, after all, God calls us individually. I can pray without your help. I can worship God on a mountaintop somewhere without any of you being within, 100-mile radius of me. I can serve God. I can obey God without you. I can keep the Sabbath day as far as a rest day alone. Why a church? Why this command to assemble ourselves together? Why this command not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together? Jesus, obviously, when he said that he would build his church, the word church meaning assembly, which means you're supposed to assemble some people, he obviously had something in mind. What? What are the objectives of a church? Well, I can tell you at least in some measure. Each of us working alone can do the work of one. Now, it will vary. Some of us will work a little harder than another. Some of us will work a little smarter than others. But as far as working for God, doing whatever it is that we feel God has called us to do, whatever the objectives that God has for us, each of us can do the work of one. Now, if 100 of us band together to do some work together, we create the possibility of doing the work of 100 plus the effect of all of us working together. Theoretically, at least, 100 of us working together should be able to do considerably more than the work of 1 times 100, shouldn't we? Well, obviously, we can do that. What may not be also so obvious is we can also accomplish considerably less working together than we would if each of us worked alone, if we do not work well together. Now, the sermon I'm going to give you today is about what makes the difference. It's about the goals and objectives of the church. The primary objectives of the Church of God are not negotiable. We have no latitude. We can't go to God and say, I've got a better idea. This is the bare minimum which we must do. We have no choice. This is found in what's called the Great Commission in Matthew 28, verse 19. Go you therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the world. Now, what is not so obvious in this, it's easy to understand. Go out, whatever you're supposed to do. It doesn't actually tell you your activity. It simply says go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them, and then teach those people you have baptized, those disciples, to observe all things that I have commanded you. We understand that, don't we? That's not that difficult to follow. But what is not so obvious is that what is stated here is stated in terms of results, not merely of activity, not merely of work, not merely of putting one foot ahead of the other, that at the end of all this, there is work to be done. Now, if you had asked me this question, say, 20 years ago, what's the mission of the church? What's the job of the church? What's the church supposed to do? I'd said, well, the church is supposed to go and preach the gospel in all the world for a witness, and then the end will come. Think about this for a moment. Now, God does promise that His Word will not return to Him void. In other words, if you preach the Word, there will be some level of results. But let's apart from that for the moment. If you went out and preached the gospel as a witness, as a warning, and made no disciples, and baptized no one, have you succeeded or have you failed? Well, you failed. Because the activity is not enough. It is not enough just to put it out there. It is not just to put it out there, take it or leave it. It is actually phrased to us that we are to make disciples. A disciple is someone who learns, who sits at the feet of the Master, hears what He has to say, and responds to it. And then you are to baptize them. And you know whether you baptize someone or not. Not only that, you know how many people you baptized, don't you? The disciples made a point of telling us that they baptized 3,000 people in one day. Now, folks, those are results. They didn't merely stand up there and preach. They didn't merely speak in tongues and make a lot of noise. There were 3,000 people put under the waters of baptism in one day, which was no small accomplishment for the church at that time. Mere activity, then, doesn't make it. Results are required. Now, I want you to consider two very important parables of Jesus. And these are important because I don't know how we make this mistake. I really don't know how we do, but we do. We tend to fall into a manner of thinking about things that our status with God is okay. In other words, I have repented of my sins, and God has forgiven me of all the sins I have committed, and of all the sins that I will commit, and therefore, I guess I'm all right with God. It is possible for me to fall away, but if I don't fall away, I'm going to be all right. Now, maybe we do not consciously say this. Maybe we are not aware of the fact that we think this. But the truth is, if you look at yourself and you look at most of the friends that you have in the church, you will know most of us live our lives as though this were the way it is. And yet, we face parables like the ones we find in Matthew the 25th chapter, which let us know that we are going to be held very strictly accountable according to certain terms about how we live our life. The one I want to take you to is Matthew 25, and verse 14 is where we'll start. The kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country who called unto him his own servants and delivered to them his goods. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to every man according to his several abilities. So he didn't put a burden upon a man he couldn't carry. You know, he looked at a fellow and he said, I think this fellow can handle 5. He looked at the other guy and said, I think this guy can handle 2. Well, this other chap, I really don't want to burden him down. I'm just going to give him 1, and we'll see what he can do with that. He straightway took his journey. Then he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same and made them 5 other talents. Likewise, he that had received 2, he gained other 2. But he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants comes and reckons with them. Now, you may be fading in and out of me because you're so familiar with this parable already. You know all the lessons that there are to be learned from it. Really, it's been preached about and preached about and preached about. Since you know it so well, tell me this. When the master came back and he called the servants in front of them, were they evaluated on the number of hours they had put in seeing to the work of these talents? I see a head shaking. No, they weren't. Not a word is said about how much time they spent. Were they evaluated or given any credit for how hard they worked in doing what was done? No. There isn't a word about that, is there, anywhere in this? Is there anything in here about the sweat that was put out? No. Is there any commendation? Boy, you are an intelligent person. You made some very wise decisions. I'm really impressed with your decision making. No. What were they, pray tell, evaluated on? Results. Pure, numerical results, measurable results. I mean, you can put them on the scale and weigh them, folks. Talents have a known weight. You can weigh them. You can count them. You can run them through your fingers. The whole lesson here, folks, is that I am going to lay out before you certain objectives. I have certain things I expect you to accomplish. They are measurable, and you will be held accountable for what you do. Now, do we get this? Do we understand the significance of what's here? Listen to how he talks to these men when he comes back. After a long time, the Lord of these servants comes and reckons with them. He that had received 5 talents came, and he brought 5 more talents. He said, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look here, I have gained beside them 5 talents more. His Lord said to him, well done, you good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you a ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. There's a lot in this parable. One of them is that the actual placing into his trust the 5 talents had to do with something more important that he was qualifying for beyond it. In other words, the faithfulness in this one small thing meant that there were going to be some other significant things coming his way. He that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents beside them. And the Lord said, well done, you good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you a ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. And he which had received 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you that you were a hard man, reaping where you had not sown, gathering where you had not strawed. And I was afraid. And I would say probably the dominant emotion that prevents us from producing results and from performing as God would have us do is fear. I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the earth, and lo, there you have what is yours. The Lord said to him, you wicked and slothful servants, you knew that I reap where I don't sow. You knew that I gather where I have not strawed. You ought to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received my own with usury. Therefore take it away from him, take the talent away from him, and give it to him which has 10 talents. For unto every one that has shall be given, and he shall have abundance. And from him that has not shall be taken away even what he has. Cast you the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, we could interpret this parable. We can play with it a great deal. We can find all sorts of things in it. I'm not going to look for too much. But I am going to look for a very simple lesson. And that is that beyond becoming a servant of God, whenever we come to the waters of baptism, we go down into baptism, we come up out of the waters of baptism, we have at that moment a capacity to serve God. And that capacity hopefully will grow year by year as we are in God's church. And along with that capacity comes a level of accountability. And at the other end of the performance period of time in which we are given certain talents, abilities, opportunities, whatever it is that we are given, we have got to come and show some results at the end of all this. Now, candidly, we are a whole lot safer in being able to predict those results, working as a part of a team, than we are working alone. Because when we work together as a team, one of us will supply what another one of us lacks, and vice versa, and together we may be able to accomplish some things that either one of us would be afraid to do alone. So the working together is a very important part of why the church is here. We are called together not merely to be together, but to accomplish some objectives, measurable objectives, quantifiable objectives, countable objectives, which is where you get the expression accountable. We are responsible for something that can be counted. And we get apologetic sometimes about the fact that, we're not interested in numbers. You do understand that. Here's the television program. We had 1,500 calls this past weekend, and 1,000 of them were brand new people who called in for the first time. Well, you're just interested in numbers. Well, what was the attendance at your church last week? We had 117 people down in Houston, by the way, last weekend. Wonderful to see all those people there. Well, you're just interested in numbers. Well, when the Lord came back and he called all these servants in front of him, what, pray tell folks, was he interested in? Numbers. Those numbers had, though, represented something far more important. We realize that whenever we get, let's say 1,000 people that we put brand new on our mailing list, or we get 1,500 calls on a weekend. In the old days they used to tell us that one response by letter as a result of radio meant that there were 1,000 people out there listening to your radio broadcast. I rather doubt that that's true, strictly speaking, of our telecast, but I think it's very reasonable to assume that when Mr. Armstrong gets on that telecast and begins to speak, he has an audience out there that would fill up the Rose Bowl sitting listening to him, and sit there and listen to him for an entire half hour as he proclaims whatever it is that he's going to proclaim. And a percentage of those people pick up the phone and call. Some of them write to us. They are numbers, but they are more than numbers, folks. They are elderly ladies in nursing homes whose family have deserted them and who are finding some meaning and hope in what we are telling them. There are women whose husband has walked out and left them with the children and bills to pay and no money coming in. And the lesson goes on and on. Every one of those is a human being, a life with a story. And to tell you the truth, one of the primary reasons why people contact us as a result of what we are doing is because their life is not working. They don't call us or write to us because their life is working. So much of the time, it is because their life is not working. A tragedy has struck, or in some way their life has gone to hell on them, to put it mildly. Well, this lesson, I think, is fairly clear. But I want you to turn now back to Luke, where a parallel parable is given, but with a little different emphasis. It's in the 19th chapter of Luke. And here there's a lesson comparable to the other one that I think is easy to miss. In Luke chapter 19 and verse 11. As they heard these things, he added and spoke a parable because he was near Jerusalem and because they thought that the kingdom of God should immediately appear. Now, I want you to understand this. These were a group of people who had an idea of the kingdom. The idea of the kingdom is that here we are, we're struggling along and praying to God, and one of these days the Messiah is going to come. The kingdom of God is going to come. The Romans are going to be cast out. You know, all the things that we think about the kingdom of God, the millennium, they wouldn't have called it the millennium, but of the kingdom that the Jews would have referred to. All these things will come to pass, and they're going to come to pass now because the Messiah is here. They did not realize there was going to be that the Lord was going to come, establish a certain set of servants, and that these servants were then going to have to persevere over time, and that there was a period of time in which work would be done, for which they would be held accountable. All was said and done. The kingdom of God is not going to immediately appear. He said, therefore, a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. He called his 10 servants and delivered to them 10 pounds, and said to them, occupy till I come. Now, unlike the other parable, where each person was evaluated, and the stronger of them perhaps was given 5, and one who was not so strong was given 2, these people are everyone given exactly the same amount, 1 pound. Occupy till I come. It came to pass, verse 15, when he was returned, having received the kingdom, he commanded all those servants to be called to him, to whom he had given the money, that he might know how much every man had gained by trading. Then came the first, saying, Lord, your pound has gained 10 pounds. We really don't know whether this guy was smart, lucky, hardworking, or all of the above, and it more than likely was all of the above, because luck does favor people who work hard. He said, well, you good and faithful servant, or good servant, because you have been faithful in a very little, have authority over 10 cities. So I gather then that this accountability thing has very much to do with what lies in the future for you and for me, for us. We have tasks ahead of us far greater than the minor, small things that we are given right here and right now. But we also see that we are going to be held accountable for how we do the things that we do. Now, when I hearken back to the guy who was basically left out because he had done nothing, you begin to realize that if you have not proved or have come to the place to where you have at least some minimal value in this work that is to be done out there, that you have no business being there at all. Now, I don't mean to say all these things to frighten you, but there are times when I really believe we need somebody to shake us by the lapels once and say, well, you got to wake up for a moment, because this is not some game we are playing. You've been called of God. You are a servant of God. Certain things have been placed in your hands, and they differ from one of us to another. And we are going to be held accountable for what we do. This is true of us, every one of us, as a person, and it is true of us as an assembly of persons. For as an assembly of persons, we have assets in our hands that are larger or different from what any one of us would have alone. We have power that we otherwise would not have. Don't you understand that? This collection of people here that meet as the Dallas-Fort Worth Church, or the Metroplex Church, you actually have power that would not exist if you were not together. What is it that you think that the people who cause trouble in the church are causing it for? It is because we have accumulated power, and who's going to control that power, direct that power, and use that power becomes important. And so how we play this power game in church becomes important. And one of the primary reasons why we have our difficulties, one of the greatest reasons I'm going to tell you today, is because we do not have a clear idea of our objectives and what it is that we're supposed to be doing, and we haven't come to really agreement on them. He goes on to say, then came the first, saying, your Lord has gained 10 pounds. You have authority over 10 cities, he said. Then the second came, saying, Lord, your pound has gained 5 pounds. He said likewise to him, you be over 5 cities. Then came another one, saying, Lord, here is your pound, which I have kept in a napkin. For I feared you, for you're an austere man, and you take up what you didn't lay down, and you reap what you did not sow. He said, out of your own mouth will I judge you, you wicked servant. You knew that I was an austere man, taking up what I didn't lay down, reaping what I did not sow. Why then didn't you give my money to the bank, that at my coming I might have required my own with interest? And he said to them, take from him the pound, and give it to him that has 10 pounds. And they said, Lord, that's not fair. He's already got 10 pounds. For I say to you, to everyone that has shall be given, and from him that has not shall be taken away even what he has. Is this fair? Well, none of us are prepared to say it's not fair. I mean, after all, God's fair. How can we stand and say God's not fair? And yet down inside of us there's something that kind of rebels against the idea that here's this guy's got 10, and he's a real go-getter, and here's this poor guy who's only got 1, and we're going to take it away from him and give it to the other guy. That's not fair. Now wait. Just imagine for a moment that your father died and left you the sum in his will of $300,000. And you, because you want to be intelligent about this, decide that you're not going to put all this money in the hands of one financial planner because financial planners differ. And I'm going to give $100,000 to each of 3 financial planners, and I'm going to let them manage my money over this next period of time. And you take a little bit, because you got a little bit left over, and take a vacation and go to Europe. After the time has passed, you go back and you have your 3 financial planners called in before you. One of them comes in and he's turned your $100,000 into $1 million. Now that's what you're dealing with in going from 1 pound to 10. He's turned your $100,000 into $1 million. Are you pleased with what this financial planner has done? Everybody's pleased. Nodding, heads are nodding. The second financial planner says, well, I wish I could have done that, but I didn't make it. But I did make $500,000 out of it, and I think that's pretty good work over the period of time. He said, well, boy, I think so too. The third one comes along, and he says, what I did with yours, I just sort of laid it up, and I didn't lose a dime. But I still have your $100,000 here. Now, you tell me, what are you going to do? Are you going to feel sorry for this guy? Because he just wasn't able to do anything, and you don't want to be selfish? Or are you going to take that $100,000 away from him? And which one of the financial planners are you going to give it to? Huh? The one that did the $1 million? Of course you are. Of course you are. This makes all the sense in the world if you understand whose money it is. He didn't give this pound to these people to keep. He gave it to them to do work. It was his. And when he came back, it was still his. And the man who had received it knew it, because here you have what is yours. I didn't lose anything. But ignoring the time value of money, he actually had lost. Because he should have at least put it in the bank so that his Lord, when he came back, would have the time value of his money. From God's perspective, you take the money away from the failure and you give it to the person who is producing results. Now, I would like to make you feel good about this. I would like to salve your feelings or take away your fears about this. But on the other hand, I think you might be better off left with your fears for a little while to think this over. Because the lesson is as plain as anything ever could be, that assets, resources, are placed within the realm or the reach of every single one of us who are a servant of God. And we are expected to do something with and about these assets that are put in our hands. And then we come and assemble together as a church, and we create out of the collective work we are all able to do still more assets that we would never have if we weren't able to combine our efforts and combine our work and work together on different things that we do. We should be able to radically increase what we do. And we're going to be held accountable individually, and we're going to be held accountable collectively. There is, by the way, a pretense on the part of the failure. He actually says, well, I knew that you're a hard man, and I was afraid, and so rather than taking any chances, I put it there. The pretense is, well, see, I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't done anything bad. I have not stolen from you. I'm okay. I have here that which is yours. But he comes back and he says, no. You said you knew I was a hard man, didn't you? So you did know that you were accountable. And you know, this is like I started out to say before. I think we tend to live our lives as though, well, all my sins have been forgiven. And I'm in a repentant attitude, and I'll keep on being in a repentant attitude, and all my sins will be forgiven. And finally, Christ will come back, and I'll come up in the first resurrection, and I'll be brought into His presence, and I'll be okay. Without the realization, and yet you know, because you have read these. There can't be very many parables more commonly cited in sermons and sermonettes. You know that there is accountability for the things that God puts in your hands. And that means that the way you live your life the rest of the day and the rest of the week and tomorrow and the next week and the next month is going to make a difference out there along the line somewhere. We are accountable for measurable results. That's what all this stuff is all about. Now, I told you all that to tell you this. There is a problem in the carrying out of the Great Commission. And it's a subtle problem, but it's important, and it's one of the great causes of the difficulties churches have. The problem is this. There are too many ways of going about it. Jesus didn't give us all the ways. In fact, management textbooks on the subject of management by objectives will tell you that it's very important that the people who actually have to go out and carry out the work, that they participate in the setting of objectives. So in other words, if you've got a big company out here and you're turning out certain kind of product and selling product, you've got to get your people together. You say, okay, here are the overall objectives of this company, and now we've got to talk about the objectives of your division and your department. And you work with the people in the setting up of objectives. What it is that this department's going to come. What are your sales objectives? What are your production objectives? Have you reached them for the last 2 years? Will you reach them next year? These are normal things that are done. Well, oddly enough, Jesus comes along. He tells us the company objectives, if you will. Go and make disciples, baptize them, and teach them. Now the next question is, how exactly are you going to go about doing that? And it's fascinating in some ways to go and watch in the New Testament as you read your way through the book of Acts and see what it was that they were doing, what it was that they were not doing, and where it was that they were going, because after all they had been told to go, and way down the line nobody had went. That's another story all by itself. But you begin to understand another thing. I said earlier that all of us working together can accomplish more than we could working individually. I also said we could accomplish less. That we would actually be better off working apart than working together under certain kinds of circumstances. What might those be? All right, let's assume that we have got 2 blocks of individuals in the church. And Block A feels that we should pursue objective X. And those of you who might be listening to this on the tape, let's visualize. I look at a man sitting down to my left on the front row, and I say, here's Mr. A over on this side. He is going to try to meet objective X, which is behind me and on my right. All right? Over here on the right is Mr. B. He thinks in his mind that we should try to achieve objective Y, which is over behind me and on my left. This makes a big X if you draw a line between these people. It crosses about where I'm standing. All right? Let's assume that both of these gentlemen mean well. They are both converted. They both love God. They both want to do the right thing. And let's assume that objective X and Y are both worthy objectives. There is nothing about either of them that can be condemned. There is no reason to say that they are bad objectives. The problem is that Mr. A and Mr. B, both pursuing worthwhile objectives, good objectives, both being good people, are going to be working at cross purposes to one another. Now, don't we all understand the expression cross purposes? Well, we're working at cross purposes here. You know, somebody's pulling on one side and somebody's pushing on the other, and you're can't figure out why the thing won't move. Well, we're working at cross purposes. I could draw analogies all afternoon long, but you all understand what I mean by that. That one of the greatest things that creates problems for us in the work of God is the fact that people, good people, who are trying to accomplish good works, are working at cross purposes to one another. Not any of them trying to do something that's unworthy or that isn't worthwhile. But you see, the problem is there are too many things to do. And there are not enough people to do them. There's not enough resources to go around. There is a scarcity of resources and a whole plethora of things to do. Why do you suppose God left us with this? Oh, that's so easy. Because of the tremendous value to us in learning to make choices and to evaluate our actions and to say to ourselves, all right, we're going to try to accomplish this. This is the objective. This is how we will know when we have got there. Because what in the world is the point in having an objective if you don't know when you got there? Or can't ever know if you do get there? A lot of our lives, folks, we spend in worthy activities that are going nowhere. Oh, it's good things. It's fun to do. It feels good or whatever. But it's a thing called the activity trap that management specialists will talk about. In every company, you'll have a person like this, that they're in there busily working away. There's never a time of day that you'll find them with their feet up on the desk asleep. They're always doing something, but they never achieve results. Whatever it is they're doing, it isn't producing sales, it isn't collecting accounts, it isn't doing those things that make their way down to the bottom line. And we've already seen that Jesus, in his parable, said that the Lord, when he came back, was not a bit interested in the process. He had no interest in the activities that were involved. What did he want to know about? The bottom line. And I realize that you know, this sounds kind of materialistic. It sounds kind of carnal. But the problem you're up against if you take that approach is that's the parable Jesus gave us. I didn't make it up. He did. And what he's telling us in this whole thing is that if you're going to be my servant, you are going to have objectives. They're going to have to be measurable objectives. You're going to have to know if you have got there, and more important, I got to know if you got there. I need to be able to weigh it. We need to be able to count it. We need to be able to see it. And the fruits really should be there for all men to see. The problem we have with the Great Commission is that there are too many things to do. And the objectives need to be further delineated, defined, and published. Now, I think in a way this is one thing that we have not done terribly well at in the Church of God International. A lot of the things we have done very well. You know, we could list off the list of things that we have accomplished over the past 15 years, and they're very impressive. We could also list the things that we've tried that didn't work, or the things that we've started and didn't finish. That's an impressive list too. Someone recently handed me a list of about 11 of those things we started and didn't finish, and we regret all of those. But the truth is that from time to time you have great ideas that don't work. You have great ideas that are beyond your capacity. You set your sights way up here, and all of a sudden, after you've started on the road, realize you don't have the staff to get it through. But you know, you win some and you lose some, but you have to try and you have to push. The objectives, as I said, have to be delineated and published. I have a little list here that I want to go through with you today because I sat down and I tried to delineate for all of us what the goals and objectives of the CGI are. The CGI now, as opposed to any random group of disciples you might pick up out somewhere who have gone about, decided to go about, doing the work of God a certain way. And we, decided whenever we started the CGI, we're not all there is to the Church of God. We are this group who have banded ourselves together to accomplish this. And in large measure, these objectives are set out in the Constitution and bylaws of the Church of God International. They're not set out in exactly this form or exactly this way, but this is the idea that is there. What I've got for you is a list of 7 items that are objectives of the Church of God International. I'm going to list them off for you. And later on, we'll publish these in a form so that you'll actually have them in front of you that you can use, or if you get the tape, you can write them down by listening to it again on the tape. Number 1, by means of mass media to create a body of disciples in the population at large. That is a goal, an objective of the CGI. Now, it's accepted that the vast majority of this audience will never contact us. Nevertheless, they are out there, and they are disciples. We can make a pretty educated guess by collecting all the ratings of all the stations that are out there that we're on, and we can put it all down, and we can get a sort of an average number of disciples who sit there at their television set every Saturday or Sunday morning and listen to Garner Ted Armstrong go through what you are able to see him go through if you happen to be able to get the program. So, first of all, is to create this body of disciples. Second, is to build a mailing list. Now, you won't find build a mailing list anywhere in the Bible, but you find the principle in a sense that you go out and make disciples and you work with them, right? Well, we build a mailing list. And one of the biggest things you've got to do in building anything of this nature, the concept I want you to understand, Mr. Armstrong made a plaintive cry on it a week or so ago in his sermon, that one of the most basic things in building a mailing list is retention. It's holding on to what you've got. I was talking to Darrell Watson from down in Destin, Florida, who is a publishing director, circulation director of a major newspaper down there. And I mentioned this to him, and he blinked, and he said, "Oh yeah," he says, "we call that churning. It has to do with the number of people who drop off the list and the new people you put on." Now, if we add 10,000 people to our mailing list over the next 12 months, and we lose 10,000 of them out the bottom through inactivity in the next 12 months, have we grown? No. So the first consideration in building a mailing list is how do we hold on to those people we have gotten to contact us in the first place? They called us, they wrote, how do we hold them? Retention is the first principle. The next principle on this building the mailing list is to add interested people by any means available. First of all, by television, that's the largest number. Also by personal referrals, by advertising, local and personal evangelism. Number 3 on our list of objectives is to develop that mailing list. Now, we do this to basically what we mean by that is to persuade the people on that mailing list, whom we call our correspondents, of the truth. We have regular mailings. There are 1 or 2. If you never made a donation, you get 1 letter a month. If you're a donor, you get 2 letters a month. And those letters come out and they offer a piece of literature. They offer a tape. They make a comment. They basically try to cause people to change the way they think. Literature and tapes, we answer letters for these people. We respond to their prayer requests. And we talk with them sometimes by the hour over the telephone if they choose to call in. Our objective is out of this mailing list and the development of the mailing list is to create donors and to create members, ultimately, of the church. If we go out there and do all this churning of the mailing list and never produce a member, never produce a donor, we haven't done anything. We have accomplished nothing. The objective is to create donors and to create members. The donors are important not merely because of the money they donate, but because that represents a level of commitment on their part above and beyond the rank and file of our mailing list. Number 4 on our list of things that we feel we must do is to develop the membership. The activities that do this are teaching, preaching, training, educating, and so forth. We have a tape program that's just unbelievable out there. The amount of stuff that's on it. And I know most of you people are already aware of that because you already listen to tapes by the dozens, and you're aware of what we're trying to do. We have Bible study courses that are on tape, gone all the way through verse by verse through the epistles of Paul on tape. These things are there to develop the membership. We do our Bible study weekends to develop the membership. We come out and visit churches to develop the membership. I conducted a long Bible study all the way through the Harmony of Gospels in this church, driving from Tyler. Was it every Wednesday night we did it for a while? To go through those things. That's a part of the development of the membership. Number 5 on the list of objectives of the church is to retain the membership. It seems so obvious But if a church is going to grow, what's the value of having a dozen new people begin attending this church in the next quarter if a dozen people drop out? You're just churning it. You're just turning it over. There's no growth involved in that. You realize across this country we have got a wide variety of churches. We have churches in the field that are growing, and we have churches in the field that are stagnant. Do you know what the biggest, not the only, but the biggest single consideration is in the ones that are growing? They are holding on to what they've got. When a member comes, they hold them. So many of the churches in the field, just people come in one door and go right out the other. They are here today, gone tomorrow. Nobody knows for sure whether they were here. Nobody knows, doesn't realize that they've stopped attending. Do you realize we've had people stop attending church to see if anyone would notice that they had quit? That was the reason. I've had people tell me that. I quit attending. I just wanted to see if anybody would know I wasn't there. In some cases, they weren't talking about this church. They were talking about another church that shall remain nameless at this time. But objective is to retain the membership. That's one of the things we are trying to do. And the sixth thing on the list is to develop and train a ministry to accomplish these objectives. And by ministry, I'm broadly defining that in the way that we did recently. That includes Sabbath school teachers and deacons and deaconesses and the whole rigmarole that we have of all the people who serve in the church. Servant means minister, means deacon, and that's the whole concept, to train a ministry to accomplish these objectives. And number 7 is to conserve our resources so they can be applied with maximum effectiveness to these objectives. The conservation of resources. It sometimes takes a budget crunch to get your attention on some of these things. We've just had one in Tyler. And as a result of it, we have really been taking a hard look at some of the things we've done. And we have reprogrammed the computer just recently. In fact, I mentioned the fact that we were mailing 2 letters a month to people who were donors. Well, to be a donor, all you have to do is have donated money one time. We just recently reprogrammed the computer so that it will no longer mail the donor letter to people who have donated less than $10 in the past 6 months. Because those people are going to be getting another letter from us anyway. We have 2 letters, the regular letter and the donor letter. What's the point in sending these 2 letters a month to these people who really don't have that much money anyway and sometimes feel pressured to give even though they are poor by that second letter coming in? So we don't do that. We send them 1 letter per month, offering them whatever it is, and we give them anything they ask for, regardless. We have cut, as a result of that, the cost of mailing that letter in half. We have much more rigidly now, we've trimmed it down hard and fast to where we are only mailing the regular letter to people who have had some kind of activity in the last 6 months. If you can think about this, that if you have not written us and gotten a booklet, or called and been updated, or changed your address, or made a donation in the past 6 months, you won't drop off the mailing list. The computer will just stop mailing things to you because it assumes that you're not wanting to do anything right now. Why bore you with all these requests? So I give you that little piece of information, so you'll understand. We are wasting enormous amounts of money in postage, mailing to people who aren't responding to it. So we program the computer not to send those things. It's easy for you to solve the problem. You can solve it. Send us some money. I'm not a bit embarrassed to ask for it. Just send us a little donation every 6 months, and you'll be just safe and sound on our computer. These things, we're doing things like we were hiring some company that came in and picked up all of our doormats and took them off and laundered them and brought them back, put another doormats out there. Somebody looked and said, "What's that cost?" We looked at it and said, "Good grief!" Everybody went into shock when they found out what it cost. Cut it off. We've been trimming stuff here, left, sideways, because we've got to hang on to our resources. I'll tell it to you in simple terms. If we save $1,000, let's say that we might have spent on let get away from us on things like doormats and the like. If we're able to save $1,000, what is 1,000 divided by 20? Anybody get some quick math? What is it? Huh? 50? That's 50 people we can put on the mailing list. 50 new people, 50 new disciples that could be made, because that's about the average, $20, $21 per person that we put on the mailing list. That's what we're aiming at. That's what it's worth. You've got to conserve your resources. You can't let them get away from you. You've got to be sure, as you do the things that are listed on this list, that you do them efficiently and do them effectively and conserve your resources while you're at it. 7 objectives are the corporate objectives which drive this institution and take us on down the line to do the job. Now, this being said, what are the objectives of a local church? Now, the objectives of a given local church may vary from those of another local church. These will have to do, in many cases, with the local economy. They will have to do with the demographic makeup of the community. They'll have to do with the cost of providing facilities, which varies widely from community to community. They will vary with the personalities and the temperament, the mix of people that actually are in a local church. And there's room for these to vary because, as I said before, there is far more to be done, far more ways of doing the things to be done than we will ever get around to trying. And so a local church has got to take a look at all the things that might be done, all the objectives that are possible or conceivable, and consider which of these objectives should we apply our church to, and when we have accomplished the objective, how will we know? And also, how will we keep our church in focus on these objectives and not allow our resources to be frittered away in other directions? And by resources, I mean the time of your membership, the energy of your membership, the heart of your people. Because all of these things, the emotional energy, the strength that you have, the desire of your people, all these things are quantifiable. We don't know what the unit of desire is. You know, we can say the unit of electromagnetic force is the volt. Unit of resistance is the amp. I don't know what the unit is of personal desire. But I do know that in every single one of you it is finite and it is limited. And you will work like a beaver up to a certain point and you run out of gas. You will run out of it emotionally, you can run out of ideas, you can run out of all kinds of stuff. So it's a real serious mistake, as many churches have learned to their sorrow, and I'm not just talking about CGI, I'm talking about all these churches. They have learned, in their words, you can activity your people to death. I remember one church that I attended back when I was a Baptist. They finally established one night a week as family night on which the church was forbidden to schedule any church activities. They did it because they were burning their people out. They had no time at home. The people who were really active in the church were down there all the time. They were involved in activities which were not necessarily pursuing objectives. And if they were pursuing objectives, they were not necessarily the agreed upon objectives of the church, that we have all said we're going to work together for this good. And by agreeing to it, we see to it that we don't wind up scattering our labors and our efforts all over the landscape. You realize how easy that is to do? It is far easier to diffuse your efforts than it is to focus them and make them work toward an objective that we have to have. The objectives of a local church may vary, but they have to be compatible with the objectives of the whole church. And that's critical, because if not, you'll work at cross purposes. You'll wind up with diminished results. You will actually wind up accomplishing less than you would if you never came together in the first place. This is one of the reasons why I have been willing on occasion. I don't like it, but as far as I'm concerned, I think in the CGI we have to allow it. We have had a local church here or there who some of the individuals in the church got mad at each other for whatever reason, probably because they were working at cross purposes, and split up. And like a parent with a couple of unruly children, we in Tyler have said to them, all right, you people sit over there, and you people sit over there, and leave each other alone. You know how kids are. You sit in that corner, and you sit in that corner, and you leave him alone. And you go out of the room, Mom, he's looking at me. The analogy of you're like children in the marketplace that Jesus used on occasion seems very, very appropriate, I'm sorry, from time to time. But candidly, if this bunch here have got a worthwhile job to do and it's compatible with the church, objectives, and this group over here have got a job to do that's compatible with the church objectives, and they're just not compatible with one another, they're better off not meeting together. because all they're going to do is damage the work that either of them are trying to do and the things they're trying to accomplish. That's all. I haven't liked it, but I have allowed it and encourage the other ministers to allow it because I feel it's better than some of the alternatives that might come to us. Now, I said already that there are all kinds of ways of doing things. And in truth, I think a local church ought to look at every single thing you do in terms of what are the objectives of this program. Take Sabbath schools, for example. What do we got a Sabbath school for? Well, Sabbath school is a good thing. We ought to teach our kids. Oh, all right. Teach them what? Why? You know, to me, it seems to me, I went up to the Sabbath school conference not long ago, and it was a very good thing. I was really glad to see them do it. But the thing that struck me was that on their program that was there, and I inquired about it, it was not there. There was not a word that I heard or saw or observed except what I said about the objectives of the Sabbath school program. And to me, it seems so easy. Let me explain. At what age, is there an age at which we can be reasonably sure that all of our children should be able to learn the Ten Commandments and recite them back to us? Isn't there? Is there some age? Blank faces out here. Don't you think there is? How many of you think there's an age when kids ought to be able to recite the Ten Commandments? All right, yeah, just get you moving a little bit. Is there an age where they ought to be able to recite all the books of the Bible? Now, are these two things a good? Are they of value? Sure, they're of value. I mean, you got your kids sitting back here in church, and I say turn to Hosea 12. We'd kind of like for them to be able to find it. Children can be taught that. That's not that hard. I learned that in Vacation Bible School in a Southern Baptist church across the street from my house. I had a little song that I could sing about the books of the Bible, so I could find them. We had sword drill. We'd stand up, all of us in a line, and somebody would give us a scripture passage. You find it, and as soon as you found it, you open your Bible, put your hand on it, step forward, and the first person to step forward got to read it. He was right, everything was there, he got points. And you got little medals, and stars on the chart on the wall for learning all these things. Folks, these are objectives. They are measurable, they're obtainable, and when you get there, you know you've got them. There is no point in establishing or carrying on a Sabbath school without a set of objectives that are defined for this church. You follow me? Otherwise, you're just involved in an activity. What are your objectives? What do you want to accomplish? Frankly, I think the time has come when we need to begin establishing some national objectives around which local objectives can be built for Sabbath school programs. That's just one example. There are other churches, churches perhaps that have music programs. What's the point of a music program? What is the objective? What do we want at the end of it? This is a little harder to measure. But let me give you an illustration. If the objective of having a music program in church is to give people an opportunity of self-expression, you have one level of talent standing before the church and singing or playing or whatever it is. If the objective of a music program in church is to honor God, if it's to project a good image of the church toward visitors who came in, and to enhance and to lift the worship service, you may want a different level of talent up here performing special music. And you may want to have the self-expression done in other occasions in churches, potlucks, parties, get-together, or what have you. What is the objective? Now, I want to give you 4 objectives of local churches today that are objectives that I think every local church ought to have in the initial outline. I mean, these are things that I think are things that cannot be done without. They are minimum standards of objectives for local churches below which no church should ever allow itself to go. Number 1 is to retain the members we have. Well, doesn't everybody have that objective? Well, maybe they think they do, but I want you to understand that unless you have some plan for achieving that objective, you have no objective. I was talking to a church not long ago. They were having a minor flap over whether or not they should take roll in church. Now, that may seem insignificant to you, but if you'd ever come out of the worldwide Church of God and you knew some of the abuses of authoritarianism that had been done, you might have some idea of why people are sensitive to that. But pray tell, if you don't have a role in church, how in the world would you know that you know, and be sure as a church that you didn't just lose track of some little old lady who was a very quiet person and who stopped attending church and nobody realized it and nobody did anything about it. If there is no plan, Mrs. X will assume that Mrs. Y took care of it. And Mrs. Y will assume Mrs. X called her, and nobody will call her. Unless there's a plan. Oh, maybe they will. But really, as a church, do we want to allow that type of thing and leave it to chance? When it is so easy to develop programs, to plan programs whereby we can take care of that. We can be sure that no one gets left out. People will get their feelings hurt, but we can make the plans that we find out about it. And when we find out about it, we can do something about it. Why do people come to this church and not come back? Are there any people that have come to this church and not come back? Oh, sure there are. That's true every church we have. Okay? Do you all have much of an idea of why? Have you sat down and talked it over? Have you considered at some length what happened, how it happened, why it happened, and more important, what could we have done as a church? Did we get a name and address? Do we have a phone number? I mean, I have these visions of people just coming in one door of the church and going out the other. So a worthy goal, a critical goal, a goal that we have to demand of all local churches. This is a goal of the overall church, and if you're going to carry a charter of the CGI, we're going to expect this of you, that you develop a plan to retain the members that you have got, to hang on to them. I remember Jesus in his last prayer before the Father, of all the things he was proud, finished the work you gave me to do. It's almost like he's ticking these things off. One of the things he ticked off was, of all that you have given me, I have lost none, except the son of perdition. Now the fact is, there are going to be people who come to us that no matter what we do, we will lose. But you know, implicit in Jesus' statement to the Father in that last prayer, I have lost none, is the fact that if he had not done things a certain way, he could have. Otherwise, what's the point in mentioning it? If there was no chance of losing them, no way one of them could be lost. The truth is that Jesus gave thought to that, and he saw to it that when the work was all done, he could go to the Father and say, I have lost none of them. Boy, I'd like to be able to say that when it comes my turn. I can't. I honestly can't. But wouldn't it be wonderful to say, Father, of all that you have given me, I have lost none. Well, I think looking at a local church, such as the Metroplex Church here in Dallas and Fort Worth, it's a worthy goal. It's a worthy objective to say to yourselves, okay, objective number one, to retain the members we have, and when God sends us something new, we don't lose it, unless they are perhaps a son of perdition. You do this by keeping a roll. You contact people when they drop out. You develop visiting programs, not with a minister. A minister can only do just a little old microscopic amount of what needs to be done. We need people in the church, ladies in the church, for example, who know Mrs. McGillicuddy didn't come to church last week, and she's only down the road, so they call her up and drop by and say, is everything okay? Another thing you can do is to learn how to manage dissent in a church, and there will be dissent in a church. You manage that dissent in such a way that to ensure that prospective members are not upset by it. If you have a member in a local church that every time some new person shows up, they collar them and buttonhole them and get them off in the corner and air all the dirty linen and the attitudes of the church, deal with it. Just deal with it. Don't ask me how to deal with it. It's in the Bible how you deal with it. Just pray about it and go do it. Because it can be dealt with. It can be stopped. All of you working together can manage dissent. You don't kill it. You don't squelch it. You don't muzzle people. You don't throw them out the back door of the church and disfellowship them. You manage dissent. No airing of dirty linen in front of the children is allowed. We avoid offenses. We avoid unnecessarily disfellowshipment. The CGI has grown somewhat jerkily to its present state, reaching out and making more disciples than we lose. The rate of the growth of a local church is most affected by the retention of members and secondarily by adding new members. Keep that in mind. Another thing you need to do is to be responsive to visitors. Welcome them at the door. Learn who they are. Follow up on contacts. Be careful about the image and the atmosphere of your church. And try your best to get them back again. Don't just let it happen. Try to get them back. Get them to come again. And if you lose somebody, you need to have a postmortem and ask yourself, why? Objective number 2, of all the minimum of all the objectives that a local church should have, to take care of the people we have. Take care of them. You develop a program, for example, to see that no one gets left out because they didn't have a way to get to a church potluck. To take care of the physical and emotional needs of the old and the lonely and the infirm. You know, it breaks my heart. You know, prayer breakfast, one of the most common things we see in all of our letters are letters from old people who are alone. So often a man or a woman will have lost their wife or their husband of 40 or 50 years, and they're telling us in the letter that they had no idea how alone a person could feel. Somebody, folks, has got to pay attention to the old, the infirm, and the lonely. Develop a plan for responding to problem people in a church. I mean, we're going to have people come from time to time who are mentally ill. We can always throw them out in the street. But on the other hand, how do you know God didn't send that person here because he wanted them to be here? I think about these things. To develop an assistance program for the poor, which involves financial aid, which involves using public resources, welfare, food stamps, and knowing how to advise people on these things. I mean, how much do we know about these things in local churches so that we can take advantage of all the tax money that all of us are paying all the time? I mean, we shouldn't have to shell out every dime somebody needs to help them. We've paid enough taxes. Somebody in government ought to help. We ought to have emergency help for people. We help our own first, because then that's biblical. You know, first of all, you do good to the household of faith, and if you've got some resources left over after that, you take care of others. You teach also you do it by teaching the poor how not to be poor. You assist the poor also in getting to festivals. And I always like to hold up that Pocahontas Church up in Arkansas as a classic example. Mr. Throgmorton set an objective for that church. Their objective was to get every single member of that church to the Feast of Tabernacles. He's reached it. I don't know if they've reached it every year or not, but they've reached it with a remarkable degree of success. Without the objective, you've got absolutely no chance whatsoever of reaching it. Objective number 3 that I feel is a minimum for all of our churches to have as a written, as it were, and I think these objectives should be written down, and I think the sub-objective, that the way in which we're going to go about achieving these objectives should be written down. Objective number 3 is to provide a secure and attractive place for the weekly assembly. That's going to be something all of you are going to give some thought to this week and next week. Good. It's time. You need to balance this off with the conservation of resources, which is one of the key elements we've got to think about. At the same time, you've got to think in terms of providing a secure, that's first, and then attractive place for the weekly assembly. To ensure that the members have a safe place to meet, to consider the image that the church wants to project, the seating, the piano, flower, sound system, lighting, renting a hall. There are a lot of things to think about. Acquiring your own building is something to think about. When will it be time? Planning ahead. There are pitfalls in it. How do you get the help you need? How do you pay for it? How do you finance it? Conservation of assets comes in again. And we're going to begin working on the reviving of the Church of God International Building Trust, which will hopefully help local churches to build their own buildings when the time comes. The church is strong financially. We were able to raise $750,000 in a bond fund from our own members to build a building that sits over there on Lake Palestine right now, which is steadily being paid off every month, and all those people are getting their money back and got no place to go with it. Well, except, U.S. government bonds and that sort of thing. The truth is that there is money out there to be borrowed from the church to do some of these things when the time comes. If we just can get by some, not get around, but get through legally some of the federal regulations that have to do and state regulations, and they regulate you to the place to where you can hardly move. But I understand that's to protect people against malfeasance on some people's parts. Objective number 4 may come as a little bit of a surprise to you, that I think every local church should have. It is to make new disciples. To engage in both local and personal evangelism, and here I want to draw a distinction. We get from churches around the country complaints, in a sense, about the fact that, well, we don't have television in our area, we don't have radio in our area. Maybe we could use a radio program because radio is cheaper and we can place radio in our area. And they go on, and we have gotten a little frustrated with it from time to time because we basically, on the principle of conservation of assets, don't want to fool with radio because television is so much more effective than radio. We've proved it, we've evaluated it, we've gotten to the bottom line again and again, and we know what we're talking about. But on the other hand, I think that we in Tyler have failed to realize that this imperative of making disciples and baptizing them is not an imperative merely given to us, but an imperative given to every single one of you as well. And consequently, when you gather together as a local church, this local church has an itch that has got to be scratched, and that itch is making new disciples. It's a part of the commandment. How can we expect you not to make new disciples? Now, here's where some of the confusion comes in, though. You want us to bring them into your area with a telecast or a radio broadcast or something of that nature. Think about this. What you are asking is us to bring the telecast in here so you can watch Garner Ted Armstrong evangelize. That you can listen on radio to Garner Ted Armstrong evangelize. Wonderful. But that is not what I'm talking about in objective number 4. That's what we do. We do it well. I mean, where are you going to find somebody better on television at doing this kind of thing than Garner Ted Armstrong? The man's a genius at it. Genius? No, not really. He's got God's Holy Spirit. He's got a gift for it. But having said that, there still is that need for local, personal evangelism. I think we haven't realized it sometimes, and those of us in Tyler have kind of struggled with this itch out here in the field instead of trying to help you scratch it, and we want to try to help you do that. I think we need to create a plan for local evangelism, to set some objectives, plan a method, evaluate performance. What should that be? Well, I don't know. I gave the Houston church an idea last week. I said, you may have seen these old games from time to time where you have a list of state capitals over here and a list of states over here, and you're supposed to draw lines across there connecting the right state with the right, capital. All right, get yourself out a piece of paper and take inventory of the people you know down one side. Down the other side, list the items of literature and tape cassettes that you know, not titles that you have seen, things that you have read, that you're aware of, you know what's on it, you know what's said, you know what's omitted, and so forth. Then draw some lines matching up the people you know with those items of literature. And once a month or once a week, depending on the length of your list, drop us a letter in Tyler and say, I think Mr. So-and-so needs to hear this tape. Would you send him a copy for me, please? Guess what? We will send him the tape. Not only that, we'll put him on the mailing list. And for the next 6 months, he will get a letter from us that offers him certain pieces of literature and or tapes that we are publishing as the weeks go on. Now, we've been putting people on the mailing list like this for a long time. We call it a blind referral. We've actually got a media code. We haven't pursued it so that the numbers in there right now are not very great. But the people who went in as blind referrals over the past few years contributed $50,000 to the work last year. People who were put on the file by people just like you. And you want to do something? That's something you can do. You don't have to send them to us all at once. You can give it some thought, pray about it, ask for God's direction, and connect specific people with specific booklets or tapes that you think they need or that they will respond to. This is a pre-qualified prospect if you're ever in sales. And it's a very good prospect. And the number of those people who actually come along and amount to something, eventually begin to make donations to the work, is more than you've ever imagined. It helps. It works. We're about to, in fact, to start putting little flyers in with a lot of our tapes and literature. For example, you get a booklet in the future, you're liable to get a little card inside the booklet that says, do you know someone who should read this booklet? If so, put the name and address on this card, send it back to us, and we will send it to them. So we are going to begin doing that, but you can be a part of that, and there may be other things that you can do. But remember one thing. In personal and local evangelism, again, we're probably going to be better at mass evangelism than any of you will ever be. You're going to be better at those personal, local things that you can do here. What are they? I don't know. This is where you participating in all these things comes in. And it's worth you thinking about all the things that I've said today, giving them serious consideration as far as how would this local church improve its membership retention program. Think about it. Talk about it. Call up somebody else in the church and chat with about it some afternoon or evening when you don't have anything else to do. And at some time downstream when you get a chance to have a business meeting in the church, maybe set aside some time to talk about these objectives that a local church might have and how this church can begin to accomplish some of those objectives. What are our real objectives and what are our de facto objectives? What do we have as objectives in this church that we have never written down? Never really acknowledged specifically and said, this is really one of the things, you can tell it by what we're doing. And does this really fit with the overall objectives of the church, or are we starting to get working at cross purposes with one another? I have a feeling that one of the main reasons for some of the conflicts and difficulties that arise in churches of God across the country is that we just simply are working at cross purposes with other well-meaning and well-intentioned people. And I think one of the keys to that is sitting down and saying, what are we trying to do? What is the good that we can do? What are the objectives we're going to try to accomplish? And when we have accomplished them, how will we know? In John 14 and verse 12, Jesus made an astonishing statement. He said, I'm going to my Father, and because I go to my Father, the works that I do shall you do also. And greater works than these shall you do, because I go to my Father. Now, can you figure that? How in the world we could ever be so vain as to think that we could do greater works than Christ? I mean, you know, which one of us is going to be out here healing a withered hand? I haven't done it. I mean, you look at the miracles that Jesus... There's no indication in the New Testament that anybody did more miracles than Jesus did. That they decay, they tail off. Is there any way that we can conceive of ourselves as doing a greater work than Jesus did? I can't. But wait a minute. If you understand that Jesus thinks of the work in terms of results, how many disciples did Jesus have at the end of his ministry? Do you know? 120. How many disciples did they baptize on the day of Pentecost when the church began? 3,000. Is that greater? Is 3,000 being baptized greater than 120? That's what Jesus is talking about. He isn't talking about the things you and I tend to think about in works. He's thinking about results, that's all. And you know what's really exciting? Is that 3,000 is nothing. That these works that Jesus did, the works that we have done, the greater works, are still ahead that can be done. Our problem is, sometimes I think we just have not really realized what they are and have not understood that we need to begin setting objectives for ourselves. Objectives so that when we get there, we will know that we have got there. Because I go to my Father, you will do the works that I do. And in fact, greater works than these shall you do. You know what's sobering? We're going to be held accountable for doing it. Think on that for a while.